Are hospitals really the best place to bring your baby into the world? I mean, aren't hospitals for sick people? During my traumatic hospital birth, I felt so anxious and scared. Scared about what the doctors were going to say next time they came into the room. Scared about what nurse would be running in telling me to flip over on my side or to run this test or that test. I was not excited or happy or peaceful to meet my son for the first time like I planned to be. For my next birth, I wanted something different. I wanted to feel free. I wanted to feel in control, and I wanted to feel peaceful. If those are things that you want to feel when you're in birth, you're in the right place. I'm going to tell you why I chose to have a home birth for my next birth and all of the reasons that convinced me even after a cesarean section. Hey girlies, welcome back to my channel. And if it's your first time here, I'm so excited to see you. Welcome, welcome. My name is Pauline. Today we are talking all about why I chose to have a home birth after cesarean, why I chose to have a home birth at all, because people give birth all the time in all different ways in all different places. And honestly, it's super, super, super rare. Less than 1% of people give birth at home in the United States of America as of 2024, 2023 data. You are new here, you want to make sure you check out my home birth story because that will kind of give you context as to why this story matters, why this video matters. When I share with people why I gave birth at home or that I had a home birth at all, I get all different types of reactions, which I honestly understand because I remember when I first heard about people giving birth at home, I was kind of like, what is this, like 1920s? Like, why would you do that? So I totally relate, and that's why I welcome any and all questions and why I wanted to make this video to share, because I know that a lot of people are genuinely curious because it is so countercultural. So I'm going to share with you 5 reasons that I decided to give birth at home for our youngest son last year in 2023. If you are interested in home birth yourself, hopefully this will help you make a decision either way, whether it's right for you or in your family, or maybe it's not, and that's okay too. I am not the type of person that is, home birth is best for everybody. Everybody should have a home birth. I do not think that that is true. I think that it takes a special type of person to have a home birth and choose to go down the home birth route. So if you want to give birth in a hospital or a birthing center or in a field, I don't know, it's great no matter what you choose. But I do think that it's, one of the reasons why I wanted to make this video is because it is so uncommon in the US, and I think that it was such a blessing for me to do it, and I think that it could be the same, could be true for you, and you're kind of looking for a sign, or if you're wanting to hear more stories to kind of convince you on how to make a decision, like I hope it can be that. So let's jump in. First reason why I chose to give birth at home was because of personal convictions. If you've watched my previous videos, you know that birth was a really big deal for me. My first birth was very traumatic and disappointing, and my second birth was really redeeming and miraculous and restorative for me. I really believe that's because that's the type of expectation that I had of the Lord and of myself, and that's really what I wanted. I know that a lot of people don't feel that way, and they don't really care how their babies are born, and as long as they come out alive and the babies come out alive, they're fine. And for me, that was really like the minimum standard. I had a personal conviction that the Lord had more for me, that that He designed me to birth and to mother and to give birth to these babies. And I believe that if it was God's will for me to do those things, that it was going to be something that was enjoyable, something that was going to be this kind of like milestone experience for me. The best way that I can kind of equate it is like, I am married as well, and I love my husband. He's my best friend, and I believe that marriage is a gift from God. And if I believed that, I wouldn't want to be in a marriage or have a wedding that was sad or that was traumatizing for me. And our wedding was one of the happiest days of my life. It was so much fun. Obviously there was stress leading up to it and all those different things, but in the end, like 100% would do it again with him and would renew our vows in a heartbeat or redo that day over with him any day of the week. And the same thing kind of goes with children. Like the Bible tells us that children are a blessing and a heritage from the Lord. And I have a hard time really believing that if that is true, if the God's word is true, which is I personally believe that it is, that the event and the experience surrounding that blessing coming into the world and coming into my life was one of the worst experiences. I don't believe that that is true. I don't believe that that's what the Lord designs and what his will is for us. I think that there is a lot of reasons why birth is so traumatic, a lot of it being because it's so medicalized. And also I think that, you know, it was something that I wanted the Lord to redeem and that I wanted him to restore. And I wanted to experience his will for me when it comes to birth. So that's one of the reasons why I chose home birth, is because I had a personal conviction that this experience was supposed to be better. I believed that God had more for me. I wasn't going to sign up to have another C-section just because I had one the first time around. Now, again, nothing against C-sections, nothing against women who even willingly elect to have them if that's what you want. It wasn't what I wanted. And I know that there's a lot of women, I've spoken to a lot of them who had C-sections, first, second, and third ones, not because they wanted to, because they were told that was their only option, because the providers were the ones who were in charge, because the providers were the ones who told them, I will not take you on as a patient unless you agree to go down this route and agree to deliver your baby in this way. And I wasn't willing to just kind of take it laying down, if you will, and give up on what I believe the Lord had for me. And I believe that birth is a gift that the Lord gives women, and it's not something, you know, that we're cursed to have or to experience. So that was, you know, my main reason, was like something inside of me that I couldn't shake, was that, you know, God had more for me and I wanted to experience and receive all that he has for me. I know that it's kind of like crazy to think of like, oh, how could you look at your C-section that way? Or how could you kind of like, you know, overlook the fact that your son was born and, you know, say that the experience is more important. And like, that's not what I'm saying. I think that God gives both. The gift, the child in and of themselves is the blessing. Joshua and Caleb, our sons, then no matter how they came into this world, would be a blessing to us and to our family. But I also think that the Lord, you know, because the Bible says that God does exceedingly abundantly above all we could ask, think, or imagine. I think that the Lord wanted to add birth as an experience, as a blessing to women, not a curse, not something that we're supposed to dread or something that we're supposed to fear, because fear doesn't come from God. So I know that that was just, again, my own personal conviction. I also shared a little bit about, you know, my first birth story, how awful I felt after the surgery, after Joshua was born. And Tim and I, my husband and I, both were like, we totally get why people only do this once, because it's so traumatic. And I knew after that experience that the enemy was trying to put something on me, put a fear on me of like, you should only have one kid. You're not the type of person who can birth children healthily or even grow them in a healthy way. And I knew I had to combat that lie that was trying to kind of penetrate itself. And I'm not trying to be like super spooky and weird. And if you're not a Christian, like, that's okay. You don't have to kind of take that bit of it. But I think that that's just, again, adds on to the personal conviction that I had, was like, I am not going to be defeated in this area as much as I can help it. So it was really important for me to try a new approach. I had done the OBGYN route the first time around and kind of did what everybody else did and like followed the crowd, did the cultural kind of norm. And I very much am a person who believes like if you want different results, you have to try a different method. And people don't do home birth. It's not popular. As we mentioned, less than 1% of births in the US happen at home on purpose. So I was like, hey, if I really want this, if I really have a true personal conviction, I really believe in the Lord to have a natural vaginal physiological birth, I can't do the same thing again. That's foolish. I can't go the same route again. So that was one of the main reasons why I chose to have a home birth, was because of my own personal convictions. Now, the second reason why I chose to go the home birth route was because of medical research and provider reviews. So I was not somebody who grew up or even as an adult had this kind of like fond view of home birth. I only knew hospital births in the US, I did kind of view home birth as something that people did abroad and like these kind of third world countries, not because they didn't have access to doctors or whatever, but it was more of like that was there, just it was just more popular over there. I didn't even really dive into like why people did it. And I've seen like water births and stuff online, kind of like this, some far out there thing people did. But when I really started getting into the research after, realizing I have this conviction, I really do want to have a vaginal birth, because that was my goal. My goal was not to have a home birth. My goal was to have a vaginal birth. I didn't even really care if I had an epidural or anything like that. It was really more that I got this vaginal birth and that I got to experience the rite of passage that I felt birth was. So after, kind of moving on from that, knowing like this is something that I still want, because after having such a dramatic birth, you can kind of, pretty much have options of like, all right, you are a C-section mom, you have a C-section, your options are, they're really no different than, I guess, another mom, which would be, to have a C-section again or to try for a vaginal birth. And it's up to you to decide what you want to do. And I know that I want to try to have a vaginal birth. Now, given the background of like my medical history and just like some conversations that I had had with my previous providers, I pretty much knew that that wasn't going to be easy for me working with the same providers that I had before. And that's what I mean kind of by the second point of medical research and provider reviews. So looking at women in my situation who had previous C-sections, would be trying for a second birth, of wanting to have a vaginal birth, having a history of hypertension, being Black, I knew that the odds weren't very good for me to have a vaginal birth in a hospital setting with an OBGYN. And that was just kind of facts. Obviously I could kind of take the approach of like, the Lord will kind of trump those facts if I really wanted to have a hospital birth again. And but the truth is I wanted to do something new. Like I shared earlier, it was kind of like I kind of know the beliefs and the approaches of these OBGYNs. And a kind of quick story, when I had done like just an annual checkup a year after Joshua was born, and she had asked me like, hey, like, are you gonna do you want to try to have another baby, or like kind of what are you and your family thinking about that? And I had told her, like, yes, we definitely want to have another baby, but I want to have a vaginal birth this time. Like, what are my odds? And like, would you guys be supportive of that? And this is again at like the regular OBGYN doctor, the same practice I had given birth to with Joshua. And they knew my history and everything. And she kind of just said like, yeah, it's possible. It's possible for you to have a VBAC. Absolutely. They do happen here in this office. They happen with these providers, and we facilitate them all the time, or whatever she said. But she said, you're going to have to go into labor before 38 weeks because of your hypertension history and the preeclampsia and all these things. And you're going to have to last that long on your own. And it wasn't really something that I felt had changed. And she had kind of said, kind of the same deal of like, you're gonna have to get induced again, or this time around, and we'll just see what happens. And I didn't feel like it was what I needed to hear. And that pretty much, after that visit, I pretty much let me know like I cannot come back to this practice if I want to achieve my goal of having vaginal birth. And so I went to the internet. Where does everybody else go when you need answers and you need guidance? And that was what I did. So I found a Facebook group in my area of women who were trying to have vaginal births after cesarean sections, really to find a supportive provider, because everything that I was reading online, it was saying that's what you need to have a supportive provider, and not just a supportive provider or like a supportive provider, not a tolerant provider. That's what everybody was saying. So I took that to mean like a supportive provider was like, hey, I'm gonna come alongside you and like do everything I can in my power and resource you as much as I can to help you get your goal. Like, your goal is my goal. A tolerant provider would be like, if it happens, it happens. But we'll have to see. I can't make you any promises. And obviously nobody can promise you anything, but you kind of get the sense from these tolerant providers that it was like, I am not really convinced that VBACing is safe and that it is the best choice for you. And I'm not going to risk my license or my practice or anything like that in order to help you reach your goal. And not that I'm asking anybody to risk anything, but I think it's more of like, do you really believe that I can do this? That's what I was looking to hear. And I went on that Facebook group looking for women to share stories of providers that were like, hey, they really believed in me and they did everything that they could to help me get there. And there were some women who had that experience in my area, or they had found providers that were supportive and not just tolerant. But the majority of the women in that group had who went the OBGYN route, honestly ended up having C-sections again. And they were devastated about it. They were really sad. And I know that there were women who were considering having another child, a third child, really just to prove to themselves that they could do it. And that's, I resonated with that because I wanted that. I wanted to prove to myself that I could do it too. So after kind of, rummaging through and scouring through that group for weeks, I really had come to the conclusion, and I saw this post where someone was like, if you really want to have a VBAC, you have to go outside of the hospital system to do that. And learning on my own really more about the hospital system in the US and insurance and how it works, it made a lot of sense to me that I had to come outside of it, given my history, given kind of my records, if I wanted to achieve this goal. I really didn't want to hire a surgeon again to help me deliver my baby. And when I started looking at OBGYNs that way, it made me feel even more confident in stepping away and stepping out of the hospital system, because yes, OBs, they do obviously day-to-day, not day-to-day, but just regular women care when it comes to women's health and vaginas and, PCOS and all the different things that only women face. But I also had to remember, these people went to school to perform surgery. They know how to do surgical births, C-sections. That's what they know. That's a tool in their tool belt. And I honestly, through my research and through a lot of things that I was learning, kind of feel like in the US, whether it's their fault or not, I feel like a lot of OBs reach for the scalpel a little quick. And I'm not saying that they're wrong, because I know that they have a lot of legal things and insurance things, and the hospitals themselves have a lot of rules and regulations and policies that the doctors have to follow sometimes when they don't even really feel like it's best. And that just again proves my kind of reasoning for stepping outside of the hospital system. But yeah, just really realizing these are surgeons, and if I don't want surgery, why would I hire a surgeon to care for me during my pregnancy? That doesn't make sense. And just looking at statistics of how high the C-section rate is in the US and how high it is at certain hospitals and in certain states, in the state that I live in and the hospital that I gave birth to Joshua in, and that I would most likely be giving birth again, depending on what practice I went to, it just didn't make any sense. It just felt, when I looked at the numbers and the data, it just didn't make sense. Why would I go down this route if somebody like me is most likely going to end up with the same outcome again? So through the Facebook group, there were, of course, some women who did have successful vaginal births after cesarean sections, and kind of just looking at what providers they used and what options they chose and what they did differently than other women to get the outcome that I wanted. I really landed on, going the home birth route. And it didn't make sense to me at the time. Because I wasn't a candidate. I was still dealing with hypertension. I was still battling through that. And when you go through a midwife, they do not take high-risk pregnancies on. And high-risk pregnancy, from what I understand, is pretty much anything with any type of complication. Whenever you have any pre-existing condition before you get pregnant, it's considered high risk. And that's not totally fleshed out true, but that's my general understanding of it. If you have any type of just medical condition, hypertension was that for me. And I wouldn't have been considered or been a candidate for a midwife practice because of that hypertension diagnosis. So I remember doing this little test online. It was like a VBAC predictor, and it was like enter in, all of your factors, your age, your race, maybe like where you live, and like just certain things. And it was like, we're gonna calculate for you like your chances of having a successful VBAC. And I did it, and it discouraged the mess out of me. I mean, I think it gave me a 55% rating, or probability, and like that was too low for me. I wanted like an 80% probability. I was like, I'm young, I'm 27. There's no reason why, or 28 at the time, I don't know. There's no reason why I shouldn't be able to have a vaginal birth. Like, I don't get this. Like, this is a natural God-given thing. So I remember just crying out to the Lord and feeling like, God, why don't you want me to have a vaginal birth? Like, you put this desire in me. I really believe that. This is a natural thing that you've given most women, the ability to do this. And I just don't get it. Like, this isn't really clicking for me. So, I mean, I didn't really hear him say anything after that, but that was a moment, just a real moment that I had with him. Simultaneously, I had kind of, been working on my own to reduce my blood pressure and get off of blood pressure medication. So I was kind of doing that in the background in the midst of all of this going on. So through my research, I did find a certified nurse midwife in my area. And the reason why it's important that I found a certified nurse midwife instead of just a regular midwife was because I was VBACing. And again, I mentioned this in my home birth video, home birth story video, but in Maryland, you cannot VBAC without a certified nurse midwife. I know there's laws and like things people are trying to lobby and pass certain laws so that regular midwives can service VBAC moms, but at the time I could only work with a certified nurse midwife, and she was about 30 minutes away from us, which is really great. Wasn't as close as the practice that I had worked with before, but still really close, like considering what my options were, because I think there's only 2 that were like remotely close to me outside of the city that I could work with, and then one of them wasn't taking clients at all. She was like taking a break from work. So this is really my only option within like a reasonable distance to where I lived. So on their website, I was super encouraged because she had like an FAQ, and then she had listed out like, yeah, most women are candidates for a vaginal birth, even if you've had a cesarean in the past. And I was like, y'all, when I saw that, my eyes lit up, because most of the providers that I see online in my area were pretty much talking about like, yeah, like we have VBACs, but like basically we don't encourage them, or we don't like talk about it. It wasn't like something of like, oh, I want you to have this, or like I trust you to have this, or like this is an option for you. It was kind of saying like they do VBACs on the side if they have to, if the women go into labor on their own, but it wasn't something that they're like actively pursuing and actively believing should be increased. So on their Google reviews, I saw a review from a mom who lived like I think 3 or 4 hours away from the practice, and she was saying how she had I think 3 babies and 3 C-sections, and she really wanted to have a vaginal birth, and for her 4th she chose this certified nurse midwife and finally had her vaginal birth and her VBAC. And that encouraged my self. Like, seriously, you guys, when I saw that, I was like, if they can help her, they can help me. Like, I've only had 1 C-section and she had 3. And like they say, as many C-sections as you have, like the risks go up and up, and your chances, to have a vaginal birth go down and down. And what I know now, I honestly feel like it's not that you can't do it. It's just a matter of like your chances of finding a provider who are willing to service you and to help you and take you on go down the more C-sections that you have. So that's my second reason for choosing that, was finally finding reviews and like talking to women who have been in my shoes and wanting the same things that I want, and realizing like, okay, to get this done and to kind of like achieve this goal, I'm going to have to go a non-traditional route and go the home birth route. So that's my second reason for why I chose home birth for myself. So I also had a friend who used the same provider, the same OBGYN that I did for my oldest son, and she has now 2 children of her own. had them both before I did. So she had her first child before I had my first child, had her second child before I had my second child. I asked her, like, what are you going to do different? Are you going to use a different provider? And she said, no, she's going to use the same provider. And one of the reasons why I didn't go back, one of the main reasons, was because of her review and her kind of experience with that provider. She was a lot healthier than I was. She wasn't dealing with hypertension. She didn't have as much of a complicated pregnancy as I did with my first, with preeclampsia and NICU and preemie and all of those different things. And she was trusting the provider again with her second. And they told her, after she shared with them that she wanted to have a vaginal birth after a C-section, they told her, like, you're going to have to go on into labor on your own. And if you don't, and if you are not induced, or not induced, but if you're not in labor or give birth before your due date, we're going to have to C-section you again. They told her that up front. And her prayer and her hope was that she was going to go into labor on her own before her due date. So her due date came and went. And if you are a mom, or you just know a lot about babies and birth, you know that a lot of women go over their due date. I think it's like something crazy, under like 10% of women, it's probably even lower than that, actually give birth on their due date. It's just an estimate. So it's very common, especially with your first vaginal birth, to go over your due date. You guys know I went over my due date with Caleb. So her due date came and went, and she ended up having a C-section exactly like they said they were going to do if that happened. So that was very upsetting for her. She said, I probably won't be able to have a vaginal birth with them. In so many words, she said, I need to have a supportive VBAC provider. So when she told me that, that was everything that I needed to know, that if they're going to do that to her, if they're not going to let her give birth vaginally just because she went over her due date, they're going to look at my file and be like, no, girl, absolutely not. You're too much of a liability. Like, this has problems written all over it. Absolutely not. We need to control the situation, get the baby out of you, stop you from being pregnant as soon as possible. So that was another review, a main, very core reason why I didn't go back to that provider. The third reason why I chose home birth was because we actually have two really good friends who had home birth prior to when I had one in 2023. That really helped a lot because we saw that it was possible. And then you guys already know, again, how rare it is to have a home birth in the United States of America. And the fact that the Lord gave us two friends that had did it prior was kind of like a light bulb moment, like, duh, like if they can do it, maybe we can do it too. Now, obviously I had challenges that they didn't have. We had one of our really good friends who she absolutely convinced me from the beginning, because she had both of her children at home intentionally, never had a hospital birth. And then our other friend, she had her first son in a hospital, and then her third baby she had at home as a result of just a second pregnancy, having a traumatic experience there at the hospital. She didn't want to go back to the hospital, which is pretty much what I, similar to my own kind of emotional state with going back to the hospital. So that helped a lot, and it actually helped my husband a lot get on board with doing the home birth as well. He was never against it because he fully understands, like, okay, you're the one who's birthing, you're the one who's like, it's more affecting you, but it did really open him up even more if like, oh, okay, like if they did it, we can do it. And he was able to talk to the husbands because they're our friends of ours, like, what should I do? Because hospital birth versus home birth is a lot more different for husbands and for fathers. So that was a really great, just extra blessing and extra comfort to let us know, like, this is really possible and it's something that you can do. Of course, I saw people online who had given birth at home and did water births and all that stuff, and that's helpful just for like vision to see, like, oh, people in general do this. But of course it takes you to another level when there's people you can call and you can text and ask them for advice and talk them through it, talk through it with them, like how they made their decisions and how their whole experience went. Like, that takes it to a whole nother level. And I really believe that it gave us vision. Like, talking to friends who had gone through it gave us vision. I also watched a show called The Midwife, which is a British show, and I loved like the first 3 or 4 seasons. I think it still comes on now, but the show has like gone in a different direction. It's still a good show and I still watch it, but that gave me a lot of vision too, because on Call the Midwife, because it's a British show, a lot of more people have home births and just births outside of a hospital in other countries more than in the US. It's extremely uncommon in the US. So that gave me more vision to see like, oh, this is really, really like a normal thing. So that can help too if like YouTube videos are not doing it for you, or if you want something that's a little bit more of like a storyline behind it that you can follow from like the midwife's perspective. That was really helpful for me. So the fourth reason why I chose to give birth at home for my VBAC was because of history, and research really supports home birth. And when I thought about this, I remember when I told my parents, this is when my dad was still alive, when I had told them, you know, not only are we going to have another baby, but we're planning to have this baby at home. I was really like not nervous about it, but I was kind of like, all right, they're gonna have something to say and like have all these concerns. And you know, my mom, she had all these concerns about it. But when I told my dad, he was like, you know what? Yeah. He was like, my dad was born at home. And I think his dad would have been born maybe in like the 30s. So it was more common back then for people to be born at home than it is now. So him sharing that about like, you know, where my grandfather was born and realizing like, okay, Jesus was born in a manger. He was not born in a hospital. And so many people throughout history were born at home. Kings, queens, royal families, like it was extremely common. It was, I think, the default. And I think, you know, I got super into British shows last year. So seeing that, you know, through times and through the 1800s, like it didn't become popular to give birth in hospitals until recently, until the past, you know, 120, 150 years did it start to increase. And realizing too that one of the reasons why I read some women started to choose to give birth in the hospital is because it was less distracting. If they had a lot of kids, or they, you know, lived in multi-generational homes, giving birth at home, there could have been more distractions. And I honestly feel like for myself that the opposite started to become true, where like there was more distractions, more anxiety, more stress for me giving birth in a hospital than there would be at home. Home is the original environment for birth. So thinking about that made me a lot more comfortable, and just realizing, I guess, like how influenced and like brainwashed I and sometimes we become with cultural norms are. And it's like, hey, just because this is how things have been done in the past 100 years doesn't mean that it's the way that things should be done. And do people, and just thinking about that, and like really trying to ask myself, with all these different things I'm learning about the healthcare system and insurance, and you know, because Joshua's birth, like the cost of it really blew my mind, and I could not wrap my head around it. More to come, you know, I'll share about that in another video, but I just thinking about, you know, how expensive this is and why is it so expensive, and just the whole healthcare system, just the whole bit of it. I just hated the whole system, to be honest, and wanted to not be involved in it. Also learning that how important comfort is, and just like being relaxed is, if you want to have a natural birth, an unmedicated birth. And for me, I just knew that that wasn't going to happen in a hospital setting. I know for me, I love being at home. I'm definitely a certified homebody, and like I feel very comfortable and less stressed at home. And if that's what I need to be, like learning to research that, like, you know, when you are less stressed, when you are relaxed, when you're comfortable, you're going to have a much more peaceful birth, and you're not going to need all this medicine and all this pain medicine and all these different gadgets and things like that. Like when you let your body do its God-given functions, like you're going to have a healthy baby. A lot of times birth, when it's interrupted, that's when stress comes in. That's when you need all of these interventions, and it's like interventions beget interventions, learning about the cascade of interventions. And you know, I don't think that that's totally and completely what happened with my first birth, but I knew that that was the story for a lot of women, and it's like, how can I learn this and like ignore it? So for me, thinking about how comfortable home is, like home is where you have all your favorite snacks, your favorite couch, your bed, your shower, your clothes. Like, don't have to to pack a to-go bag to go to the hospital and forget something, or you bring all your comfy things and then they tell you you can't wear that. I know for me, I was very like annoyed in the hospital with Joshua's birth when they're telling me like, oh, well, you're not allowed to eat after certain times, you can't drink water, like all these different things. I was like, I don't want to be told that. I don't want to have that experience. I want to feel like I'm in control. I want to feel like I'm catering to myself. I don't want them to be distracted. I think that was really, really important for me, just the whole idea of like being in my element. And if that's what my body needs to welcome my baby, if that's what I need to, what do I need to be relaxed? Like, and if you kind of ask yourself that, like, when are you most relaxed? Probably not in a hospital. Probably not in a doctor's office. You're going to be at home, lounging on your bed, on your favorite couch with your favorite snacks. Like, that's where you want to be when your body needs to be focused and your body is like asking so much of you. Because the truth is, hospitals have a lot of rules, and maybe, depending on what your experience is, I know for me, I had a couple experiences staying in hospitals. For me personally, I got surgery on my wrist when I was in middle school. My dad was in and out of the hospital growing up, and I just knew that hospitals, they have a lot of rules, like I mentioned before, and not even just when it comes to like procedures and like choices and decisions that are made, but like, as far as who can come visit you. And we had our first son at the height of COVID, and there was even more rules then, and I really didn't like that. That just adds even more stress, like subconscious and conscious, to your body, and that doesn't help you welcome your baby if you need to be relaxed and you need to be kind of centered and peaceful. I know for me, it was really important that I felt like I was in control and that I was kind of the authority in this birthing experience. I definitely didn't have like the most traumatic experience with my first birth, because I know there's some women who feel like, oh, the doctors made all these decisions for me and I consented to things that I didn't even know, and even like some potential abuse. Like that wasn't my story, and I'm grateful for that. But I also know that I didn't want to be in the type of environment where those things happen, or where there's like even probability for that. I wanted to feel trusted. I wanted to be with a provider that believed in me. And not that the OBs didn't believe in me, but I think that for me, I felt as though the OBs were not really looking at me as a person. They were looking at my chart and my history and saying, well, if these things happened before, they're probably going to happen again. And I didn't believe that. I believed that God had spoken a better word over me. I believed that the old things had passed away and God was doing a new thing. And I needed to be with a provider and be in an environment where that was going to be supported. And I even had one of the OBs in my old practice, she was a believer. And not that means that she doesn't believe those things, inherently, but I think that I just needed to be, in an environment where that was at the forefront and not in the back burner. And I definitely wanted to be in an environment where it felt sacred, and I wanted this experience to bring me closer to the Lord. I wanted to feel like this was something that was intimate and spiritual, and something where God's presence was at the forefront. And I can't control that in a hospital. I mean, of course you can bring your worship music and light the candles and do all the things. Like, some hospitals are more lenient than others, but I just felt like, okay, if home birth is an option for me, if I can make it an option, I want to go that route. Like, I want the full thing. Just hospitals are not a safe place for me. I just felt like, hospitals are where people go when they're sick and people, go there to get, kind of bad news. But it's some place that you want to be in and out. It's not a place you want to kind of dwell and linger. I learned to do with hospitals and women giving birth in hospitals, like, you're timed. Like, they are not there to help you really feel comfortable. They're there to get your baby out and move on to the next, to the next patient. And like, it's reflected in the bill. The longer you stay there, the more you're charged. And I understand that because you're using their facilities and their services. But I loved that, home birth was a one-time fee. I think that kind of speaks to, like, they're not there to make money. And, that's also, a part of going outside of insurance too. So the fifth and last reason why I chose to have a home birth for my VBAC instead of in a hospital or even a birth center was because I learned through my research that the risks were really the same in both environments. So they're at home or in a hospital setting, the risks were the same. And honestly, the risks were better or lessened with a midwife provider than with an OB. And you can kind of imagine like, okay, people who work with OBs, they're more likely to get C-sections because OBs do C-sections, midwives don't. So, you can always start with the midwife and then go kind of like, if you want to say that midwives are like less skilled than OBs, because they technically are. They don't go to school as much or for as long. But midwives are the experts when it comes to physiological birth. OBs are the experts when it comes to surgeries and medicalized birth. So you have to kind of decide, which one you want. And I know for me, if I wanted to have a physiological birth, I need to go with the expert in physiological birth. One of the main things people kind of ask when it comes to home birth and like, why would you go the home birth route? What happens if something goes wrong? At least if something goes wrong, you're right there in the hospital and they can help you. But the truth is, things go wrong in hospitals too, all the time. Like most of the time, something is going wrong in a hospital. And sure, do things come up during home births? Absolutely, they do. But the risks are not as high in a home birth. And I know with my providers, my midwives, they are extremely well versed in what is normal. And if they see something that's not normal, they'll be the first one to tell you need to go to the hospital. And that was actually a part of my home birth care, was kind of leading up to the birth. At my home visit, they asked me, like, hey, if you need to go to the hospital, which one will you go to? And even learning the facts that like most people who do transfer from home to the hospital, it's because of pain management. It's not because they're bleeding out or because they're dying or their baby is not breathing or something like that. And even learning that, midwives, they bring oxygen tanks with them to the birth in the event that mom or baby needs them. Like they're extremely prepared. So I think just learning that like, and also for me with going with a certified nurse midwife, realizing like these people are nurses. Like the same nurses that will be helping me in the hospital they have the same qualifications and education that these women have. Now that's not true, of course, if you go with just a regular midwife and not a nurse midwife. But again, they go through formal training. I think like when I told my mom, she was a lot more comforted because she really didn't know what like a midwife was or like what their education background was. Like she really thought that they were just like random people off the street who just catch babies. And that's really not, the case, and that's not who they are. Like they go through extensive training, they go through apprenticeships, and they are certified. And I think that like realizing that like, okay, if I can trust a random nurse that I don't even know, why can't I trust this woman who I've done this extensive research on? Providers that I chose, and I found most of them are this way, they're extremely data-based and like research-based. So every decision that they have, it's not like, because I know for me, I kind of thought midwives were like, oh, they're just like these crunchy granola people who are tree huggers and like, they just kind of like go with the wind and whatever they feel. And that's really not the truth. At least, again, not with my providers and not with certified nurse midwives, because again, they are nurses, they work in hospitals, they went to college, they have bachelor's degrees, they have master's degrees. Like these people are legit, like as legit as they get. They just don't like working in the hospital environment, I think because of like insurance and all that stuff and all those rules. And I've actually found a lot of nurses who even work in that environment, like they don't like it because they're like, yeah, they're restricted by kind of like what they can do with the mothers and with the birthing, and like that's not fun for anybody. So all in all, the risks for at home, giving birth at home for me and in the hospital were the same. A lot of people want to say, oh, okay, well, the risks with VBACs, you could have, what's it called? You can have now I'm going to have to look it up. Okay, uterine rupture, that's what it's called. So they're so concerned about, you can rupture your uterus because you already have an incision or like a break in your uterus there, and it's going to be vulnerable if you have contractions and you go into labor. But also what people don't tell you is that you can have a uterine rupture even if you've never given birth before. You can have a uterine rupture with your first pregnancy. The risks for having a uterine rupture are so low. I think they're below 1%. And it's the same whether you give birth at home or in the hospital. Like, these are things that, you know, that they do happen, but also like a uterine rupture can not completely be prevented. Like the environment that you're in is not going to prevent it. I think that it's just, again, this kind of like doomsday and like fear mongering mindset of like, oh, something's going to go wrong for you. And it's like, well, who's to say? You don't know. And I know for me, I only live 10-15 minutes away from a hospital. So even if something were to go wrong, like we could get there pretty quickly, you know, to solve it. And, you know, it's just not, I don't want to make decisions out of fear. Like, what if things go really, really right? So there you have it, the 5 reasons that convinced me that I needed to have a home birth instead of a hospital birth for my VBAC, my HBAC, or vaginal birth after cesarean section. If you are interested in having a VBAC and you still have questions, please let me know in the comments. I would love to address them, or if there's any other aspect of home birth or VBAC or HBAC that you would like to hear, please let me know. But thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!